This really is a full house. Welcome back. It's a bit of a cliche to say this, my next speaker requires no introduction. Francis, I really don't think requires very much introduction at all, but let me just say a couple of things. 3 or 4 things. First of all, Francis Maude, Minister for the Cabinet Office, is a moderniser. I think politically that's probably how you position yourself. And that's quite an important theme, I think, for Francis and the way you have politically led reform in all sorts of areas. Reform for the civil service, reform in how we buy things, reform in how we do projects, moderniser. Second, Francis Maude knows Westminster and knows Whitehall really quite well. 2 spells in government, understands what we do, and if I may say so, cares quite deeply about what we do, why we do it, and how we do it. And also, if I say so, quite unusually for a minister, cares, is really interested in how we do things as civil servants. And thirdly, sparing his blushes, has tackled this job with a sort of passion and drive and determination and vigour, which is kind of quite unusual for a minister in charge of or running or politically leading the civil service. So we've benefited you, Francis, from your drive and determination and energy in an area which is difficult. It's energising for us, it's exciting. As I said earlier, those of you who were at the session earlier, the times we face, the particular challenges we face right now means that the size of the response and the quality of our response has to be commensurate. So this is really important stuff, turning around the civil service, reforming it, building on its fantastic strengths to position ourselves for the future. Francis is going to reflect on the civil service reform programme overall, 1 year on. Over to you.
Richard, thank you. And as you say, I've had 2 stints in government, interspersed with the longest sabbatical in political history of 18 years. And you were kind enough to describe me as a moderniser. I mean, there are parts of the Conservative Party when that's a term of insult. And it certainly, when I was described as the godfather of modernisation in the Conservative Party, was not entirely meant in a complimentary sense. I come from a really sort of establishment background. I'm not one of those, I'm not an iconoclast. I don't always want to turn everything, I'm not someone to whom any status quo is a living affront, although some people might sometimes think that. But I do, like so many civil servants I meet, I want things to work really well. And I think the frustration that I find in so many people in the civil service, they see places where things are working fantastically well, and then places where they aren't. And it's actually, how do we find that magic of the places where it works brilliantly and actually import that right across the system. I've been doing this job now for more than 3 years now, and I love doing it. I really love doing it. There used to be a bit of a sense that ministers kind of always want to be moving on and doing the next thing, done that. And actually being Minister for the Cabinet Office tended to be a job which people either did kind of on the way up, so you sort of pass through it rapidly on the way to do something a bit more kind of high profile, or something you did on the way down, frankly, on the way sometimes out. I don't think I'm quite in that category yet, although, hey, there's a reshuffle around. But I love doing this, and I really care about getting it to work, and because it really matters for the country. And I'm not going to do the whole kind of global race thing. It's a competitive world, all of that, all that. You live and breathe it, all of you, every day. What I would say is that there's a moment now where we can do dramatic things, and it's a combination of a lot of things. Politically, it's very, very rare, and certainly not in my lifetime has it been the case, that all 3 political parties have either current or recent experience of government. That's unique, and all 3 parties are utterly convinced that we need to reform, to do things differently for the future. We are, you won't need me to remind you, we've got a massive fiscal deficit and we need to do things for less money. Some of us were at a dinner last night actually with Liam Byrne, who famously penned those words as he left the Treasury. Dear Chief Secretary, I'm afraid there's no money, as we discovered. And so we need to do things differently. We need to do more for less. And the public's expectations are rising, so we need to be able to make that real. And of course, that's a very punishing discipline. That's a very hard set of disciplines to deal with. But actually, what it does is it forces us to think differently and do things differently and innovate. And of course, that has happened. The size of the civil service, you don't need me to remind you, it's about 15% less than it was 3 years ago. And yet, I don't think any of you would think you're doing significantly 15% less than you were. In fact, in many places, we're doing more than we were. Actually, the amount that's being done has increased. And what that means is productivity has improved quite dramatically. So a year ago, just over a year ago, we published the Civil Service Reform Plan, and I had a bit of criticism because the plan was not very high-flown. It was not a very kind of highfalutin, visionary document. It was kind of quite gritty and practical, and it set out some things we'd identified, which everyone agreed on, actually. I've had kind of virtually no dissent, both either inside or outside, about the program that Bob Kerslake and I set out back then. They were things which we spent time thinking, if we do this, will it make a difference? Answer, yes, and a difference for the better. And so very soon, in the next few weeks, we'll publish a report, as we said we would, on 1 year on. Now, how have we done? Mark our own homework, give ourselves a report card. And that will be a truthful report. We will, I saw recently a description of the draft which said it was brutally self-critical. I don't think it's brutal, but it is honest. And of course, we're not saying that nothing's happened. Of course, that would be ridiculous. There are lots of things that have happened. There's been good progress. And also, we'll be really clear that a lot of the things we were talking about in that plan are difficult. If it was easy, probably would have been done some time ago. These are hard things to make happen. And frankly, even if we'd kind of really got going on all of them straight away, we wouldn't be declaring victory at this stage. Some of them are things like improving capabilities, which are going to take a lot of time to get done. So, this is not about sort of self-laceration. This is about honesty and being open with ourselves as well as with the public about the progress that we're making. And it's sometimes said that if we're too honest about this and we're too open about it, it's demotivating for civil servants. And actually, I think better of the civil service and civil servants than that. I remember recently we published for the first time the Major Projects Authority annual report. It was quite a difficult decision to make. We published the RAG ratings. This project, that's red rated. That's kind of out of the comfort zone, both for ministers and for senior officials, because we're saying we're going to be open with the public about how well we're doing. And actually, what does two things. One is it improves our reputation for trustworthiness, because actually if you're willing to say openly where we're not doing so well, then there's a decent chance you'll get more credit for saying when you claim that things are going well. Second thing it does is improve performance, actually, and that's really clear. Much more rigor about measuring our progress on projects has led to improvement in progress. So openness drives real improvement. So the honesty, the openness is really important, and you'll see in all the kind of billboards we've seen around the place, it's probably on here somewhere, open. A civil service that's open is really important. And if we're not open with ourselves, and we aren't actually, as a civil service, nearly as open as we need to be, both in terms of people being able to move in and out freely. It's much less permeable than I think we want it to be, and that's one of the things we've all said and agreed. But we need to be open about what's going on. And one of the things that civil servants often say is that we're not always as honest with ourselves as we could be. And one of the criticisms that civil servants themselves make in the People Survey is that performance management isn't always as honest as it should be. There isn't the clear recognition of the outstanding performance nor always the rigorous addressing of underperformance, which that is demotivating for the hard-working majority who kind of do get on and do the work and want to get things done. So there's no virtue in us being mealy-mouthed. If you want to drive change, as we all do, then actually confronting the truth is really important. Not to, as I say, to lacerate, to flagellate ourselves, but so we kind of see, we're clear about what needs to change and make it happen. So, of course, there are great things being done. Say the productivity improvement. Some departments have seen reductions in their HQ size of 50% or more in some cases, delivering radical reform programs and being willing to drive really significant efficiencies. And this isn't easy. You know, all of you know that this is really not easy. It's tough to do, but it has to be done. But on the civil service reform actions that we set out, I think it's fair to say progress has been mixed. And that's not a kind of euphemism. When often people say it's mixed progress, they mean it's crap progress. And that's not what I mean or am saying. I genuinely mean it's mixed. Some things gone really well. We're making big progress with digital. We are getting to be more unified, and there's more appetite for us to be a more unified civil service than was the case. Shared services, making real progress in this last 12 months, moving much more strongly towards that single government legal service, for example, actually back to a single government legal service that Paul Jenkins is leading, and in a whole load of other areas, doing things that will lead to us being a more unified civil service than has been the case, but which actually, again, very widely, people say, yes, that's what we want to be. We want to be more unified. So lots of progress being made. But actually, in a lot of areas, I think it's fair to say we underestimated how hard it was going to be to make progress. And there is a bit of this kind of catch-22 thing, that some of the things that make it hard to drive progress and reform are exactly the things that need reform. I mean, in too many cases, there's been, there hasn't been the capability. And one of the things I think we're getting better at, but we're not yet there, is a willingness to say when we don't know how to do something. I remember one of the phrases that gets trotted out. I mean, when you look back over the history of civil service reform, going right back to Fulton nearly 50 years ago, there was this thing, well, we can't have generalists anymore. I mean, the age of the generalist has gone, and it sounds like the right kind of thing to say, and I kind of lamely signed up to it. But actually, it's neither true nor is it right. Actually, all great organizations have people who are generalists. And you want to have people whose skill set is clear-headed, hard-edged analysis, the ability to marshal evidence, to bring in expertise, to use expertise, to provide solutions, options, that kind of generalist skill. Actually, in all organizations, you need to have that. Not everybody needs to be an expert or a specialist. But actually, because we've had this kind of mantra that we don't really do generalists anymore, it makes it really hard for people to say, I don't know how to do this. But actually, the best generalists will very freely say, I don't know how to do this, but I know someone who does. And so that kind of part of it is something we need to do. We need to, again, be more open about. And we're not that good at, haven't been that good at program delivery. Program and project management, and that we've seen that in some of the way in which we haven't made as much or as rapid progress on some of the actions as we would have hoped. But when I say it's mixed, and there are good things, but actually some things which haven't gone nearly as well as we would have hoped, or as fast and far as we would have hoped, it's not a criticism of the civil service or civil servants in general. Actually, if anything, it's a criticism of ourselves as leaders, that we underestimated the resources that were needed, putting in place the leadership that was needed for the actions early enough, and making sure that there was the dedicated commitment to making it all happen. So, let's make sure we need to make sure that we rectify that over the next 12 months, so we really do accelerate. And I'm conscious that whenever I say anything that's, I can make a speech where I say 9 things that are good about the civil service and 1 thing that's mildly critical, and guess which one gets picked up by the media. But I will always, in the way I deal with you as civil servants, be open, give absolute praise where, in the huge number of places where it's due. But I think we need not to kid ourselves where change is needed. And actually, one of the things that illustrated this for me was we introduced a requirement that all ministers should be asked for to feed into the appraisals of civil servants whose work they see. And when we said this, some people interpreted that as a negative. Oh, that's just ministers who want to have a go at civil servants. Actually, when we did it, and Richard sat down with me, we've now done it twice, the mid-years and the end of year, and we spent an hour and a half or so going through a long list of officials in the Cabinet Office whose work I see. And actually, it was this wonderful thing where so much of the time when you're a minister, your time is spent up with the things that aren't going well, and you don't spend time looking at the things which are going well, because actually they don't come before you nearly so much. But then actually just going through the list, all of these people whose work was brilliant, who were doing brave, difficult things, sometimes swimming against the stream, and actually just that moment where you reflect, yeah, that's a really serious piece of work, someone who's doing fabulous work, and in so many cases that's what we were, I was actually being made to reflect on that and feed that in. And I found that incredibly valuable. And what it did was just remind me, and ministers often need reminding, what a fabulous job so many civil servants actually do. And sometimes, when I moan, as I have been known to do a bit, about things that don't happen as quickly as I would like, that gets interpreted as people think, oh, Francis doesn't want challenge. And I just want to lay that one completely to rest. Actually, what good ministers want is the most candid and open and clear advice. You do not want people who only tell you what you want, what they think you want to hear. And actually, interestingly, a minister the other day, actually not from my own party, was slightly sort of moaning that some of the officials in their department was, often they were waiting to kind of work out what he wanted to hear before giving the advice. And actually, I just want the advice. I mean, you genuinely want the advice. And that's what ministers want: clear, candid advice, challenging advice, which you can interrogate and engage with and argue about, and then you make a decision, clearly the best informed decision that you can make, and then you want it to happen, and you want it to happen with swift and pacey and effective implementation. So, I mean, let me come back to the vision thing that we were slightly criticised for not having enough of last year. And not great at vision, but the description of how we thought the civil service ought to be, I think is fairly clear, and I don't find a lot of argument about it. And it is going to be smaller. It is already smaller. Existing departmental plans show it being smaller yet. It'll be flatter, less hierarchical. It'll be faster. Things will get done more quickly. And those two things are very closely related. It'll be more unified, as we've talked about. There'll be better performance and talent management, because I think, again, it's widely understood the talent management hasn't been as good, as strong as it needs to be. People's careers haven't been developed as proactively and effectively as great organizations need. It'll be more accountable for delivery. There'll be modern terms and conditions, which always sounds like a negative, but actually, when I talk about modern terms and conditions, one of the things I think about is giving civil servants technology that actually works well and makes it easier to get the job done rather than more difficult. Security passes that when you go from one bit of Whitehall to another, you don't wait around for a quarter of an hour to be allowed in. Basic things that actually aren't that hard to do. And one of the frustrations I think we all have is that we haven't made nearly as much progress on those things over the last year, because those things actually make it real and make a difference in people's daily lives at work. But of all of those things, Well, we were just talking a bit earlier about what is there a single thing that kind of encapsulates or would be the trigger for much of it. And I think the thing that actually is the biggest single trigger, and I must just tell you this, I had was at a dinner last night, a sort of seminar mode talking about civil service, and whenever something came up about something that might need to be changed, I would be asked, so it's just about that, is it? Or it's just about, and of course it never is just about one thing. It's about a whole lot of things that need to change. But if there's one single thing, it's about us being focused and managed on outcomes and outputs rather than on process. And actually that's, it's one of the things we always talk about, and it's the most difficult thing to fix, actually. But everyone, and a lot of people who come into the civil service from outside, whether from local government or from the private sector, often say that it's one of the things we're not good at. It's about giving people clarity about what are the outputs and outcomes that they're expected to deliver. And actually, when you get that clarity, what you also get is clarity about the freedom that you have to deliver those outcomes or outputs in the best way, and the encouragement and the freedom to innovate in finding the best way, which goes with the obligation that the organization will praise and support innovation and support in learning from the innovation, and especially learning from the innovations that don't work, and quite a lot of them won't, and are discontinued. And when they don't work, we need to discontinue them quickly, and that doesn't always happen either. And a lot of these concerns, as I say, come from civil servants themselves. I mean, I recently, a few months ago, I was speaking at a base camp program, people who'd recently joined the senior civil service. And it was great in that it was full of brilliant people. I mean, people who were energetic and talented and full of enthusiasm and ambitious to change the world. It was that, all of that was great. The less good thing was that so many of them were frustrated, which led me to reflect on the thing that Peter Hennessy, Lord Hennessy, has sometimes said, that too often the civil service can be less than the sum of its parts. I mean, full of brilliant parts, I mean, exceptional people, but actually we don't give the space and encouragement for them to deliver all that they can deliver by themselves, let alone the extra that comes from people doing things together. And that sometimes leads me to reflect on the civil service values that we're rightly very proud of: the honesty, objectivity, impartiality, integrity. Now enshrined in statute, that's all great, and they're all good values. I mean, hey, who wouldn't agree with all of those? But they're all static values. They're not values that are warm or dynamic. And Gus O'Donnell, when he was head of the civil service, often talked about, he had 4 P's: passion, pride, professionalism, and pace. And I always think those, there's a warmth and a dynamism and a humanity in those values, because, too often we can get kind of obsessed with impartiality. Well, what does impartiality mean? You have to be indifferent to what you're doing? Absolutely not. And that's not remotely about politics. I mean, the best civil servants, some of the best civil servants I've had working for me in my 2 widely separated stints in government, the people I wouldn't ever dream of asking, of course, but I've strongly suspected they didn't vote for my party. Doesn't matter. Couldn't care less. What I care about is the commitment and the passion that they invest in doing the things, implementing the agenda and advising in a clear and candid way. And, too easily, impartiality and objectivity can be interpreted as meaning actually indifference. And the best civil servants aren't indifferent about what they do. They're passionate and committed and dedicated to making it happen. So if I didn't believe that all of this could be done, I wouldn't have wanted to stay doing this job, which I love. It has its moments, and it's not all fantastic, but it is incredibly rewarding. And it's particularly rewarding at the moment, in a way because it's difficult. If it were easy, it would be less rewarding to do. But where we are in this big moment in our country's history, where we're coming out of, we hope, a flat period of the economy after a deep recession, in a really difficult, uncertain world, very competitive world, where we need to do things better and better every year, where actually we can't disguise, we can't mask things that aren't going so well by there simply being more money around, because there is, as I said when we started, there is no money. Actually, we have to live much more by our wits and by our skills and by our innovation and by our energy, and investing all of those human things, the knowledge and the wisdom, the accumulated wisdom and the technical expertise and all of that together, bringing all of that together to make this what at its best it can be, which is the best civil service in the world, in one of the greatest countries in the world, which is where we need to be, because actually on us and what we do depends the livelihood and the prosperity and the security of a whole lot of people. So no pressure, but this really matters, and it can be done. And we're showing that it can, you're showing that it can be done. There's more to go yet. Thank you.
Francis, thank you. Great note to end on. It matters and it can be done. Now, we had a sort of time for Q&A. We've got a small time for Q&A, but not that long. So does anyone want to kind of open with a question? I can't see anything, but I can see a hand there. Is there a roving mic, I think? Or is there a roving mic coming your way? Can't see a roving mic. Can you just bellow then?
I'll try. Graham Henderson, Department of Health. Francis, very long time since I've heard anyone talk Thornton, but whereas I wouldn't disagree with what you say about generalists, where do you actually see the role of specialists in the civil service? Because certainly I believe they're a very key component part. They're essential that the organisation knows what it's talking about. Yeah. Where do you see them fitting into the new civil service reform agenda?
Where do you see the role of specialists?
Well, I mean, you need specialists. Obviously, you need experts, you need specialists, but you need generalists as well. And it's actually all about having the right balance, and being really open about what it is we expect of people. And I think there has been much damage done by this thing of, the age of the generalist has gone. Because let's say it again, you just need the balance. So building up specialist skills, I mean, you will have people who've come in as generalist civil servants who stay in the same department and build up deep expertise, deep knowledge, specialist knowledge, and they won't necessarily be kind of professional engineers or whatever, but they will know more than anyone else about a particular subject. And you need that, so you need the combination. Again, it's being really clear about what that combination is.
Just to add to that, I mean, I started my career as a specialist. I've gone from specialist to generalist, which is an odd kind of feeling, really. But I agree with that. I think the professions in government should be probably more visible. Yeah. I think the leadership of the profession should be more visible. I think for me, it's a really key part of this unified theme. Sometimes specialisms are buried in penny packets, and that you don't get the strength of the pooling of their knowledge. I spent 5 years in DWP, and I realised the importance of the analytical community. I'd never realised before. Deep specialism, really important. So for me, greater visibility and greater role for the heads of profession as well, I think. Yeah. Let's have one or two more. I think there are roving mics, but the trouble is there are people sitting in the aisle, so probably impossible to get them around. But Hannah Portman, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah. Well, one of the things, I mean, a lot of it's about behaviour. and there's a very interesting book I was made to read recently, and then got completely engrossed in, about Israel. It's called Startup Nation. There's a description of how the Israeli Defense Force works and the culture there is there, where it's actually a very flat organization, and individual members of the IDF are very strongly encouraged to do two things. One is to challenge, and they're pretty clear expectations of what they're expected to deliver, but they're kind of encouraged to feel very free to challenge the ways of doing things. But the second part of it, which is equally important, which is the other side of the coin, is to take responsibility for it. And I think our culture in the civil service doesn't conduce to that. And if there was to say, going back to that single thing which I think can make most difference, it is being really clear with people in our teams what's expected of them. What are we expecting them to do? I mean, when we talked about, during the Olympics last year, we did we encouraged flexible working, people to work from remotely, from hubs or home, to have fewer people coming into central London. In fact, the first week of the Olympics, central London was completely dead. No one came in at all. But one of the resistances we found when we were encouraging this, because I'm a big fan of this kind of flexible working, was managers who said, well, how will I know that my team are doing the work if they're not here, if they're at home? And the answer is, well, that's not how you should be measuring them. You should be measuring them on what they're producing. I mean, letting them know what they're expected to produce, and are they doing it? It doesn't matter whether they're at home or on the moon. Actually, you should be able to know what they're doing and judge and support them on that. And I think those are the kinds of things which are, when we talk about being flatter and less hierarchical, that sounds as if it's about structure and organization, but it isn't. It's about culture and behavior. And the civil service, and this is universal, it's not absolutely everywhere in the civil service, but the prevalent culture is that it's a hierarchical culture. And that actually everyone can take part in changing.
Probably time for one more.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I went on far too long in my speech.
Lady 5 or 6 rows back, the microphone is just coming to you. Do you want to, is there a button on the mic?
Yeah.
Okay, quick question about communicating civil reform consistently, making sure teams do it, getting a message without being lost in translation.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a really good question. I don't have all the answers. I mean, it is absolutely axiomatic that if you're that in a big change program, communication are the three most important things, and constantly telling people what's going on. If you don't constantly tell people what's going on, then speculation and rumor take over, and it's constantly telling people. And one of the things that I would love us to be doing more of is just picking up the odd sort of anecdotal stories about things which are happening where, a team in a part of some department are doing things in a really different way, which hasn't been kind of ordained by Bob Kerslake or me or anyone at the centre and at the top, but which nonetheless reflects what we're trying to see happen. And so it's actually showing all that, and this is happening there are lots of examples like this, and we need to be harvesting the stories and promulgating them more, because what that does is illustrate. It illustrates, it also gives people confidence and that it can be done, because sometimes it all seems it's all too hard. And it's partly the point Hannah made, what can all of us do in our own sphere to promote this and drive it. And actually, it's just all of those small illustrations of change and putting those out. I mean, one of the things actually that I've found a bit odd is that it's not possible to send emails to all civil servants. I mean, I found that slightly bizarre. We're getting there.
I think we had a difficulty last year, if I'm honest, about departments had change programs that were going on, and it was quite hard for some departments to say, well, hang on, do we badge this as civil service reform or as the training program we'd already started? And I think by and large we're over that, because the stories that we're telling, and God knows there are hundreds of them downstairs at the hubs. I tweeted one about the Department of Health's digital policy hub, fantastic, demonstrating me as part of the digital. So we're no longer afraid of saying, oh, that's what we mean. It's actually about doing it smarter, digital, just thinking differently, joining up more, as I said, unified professions. That's the language of service reform. It doesn't have to be aligned to a particular action point in the plan. So capturing the spirit of the plan, telling the stories about the stuff we're doing, which is not just good, but is transformational. Invitation to anyone in the room, go to the Civil Service Reform website, contribute your story to that, tweet about what you've seen today, tell your colleagues, remember the best thing that you've seen today and go back and tell your friends about it and do the same. It's that sort of spirit. It's a combination of controlled communications and viral communications, I think would be fantastic to achieve. Now, we really have got time for one more, partly because Bob Kerslake's on stage next, and partly because I'm leading out, just to plug for the next session, there's a session in the space outside Hub 6, which is a bunch of fast streamers debating with a bunch of 16, 17-year-olds who've just been through the National Citizen Service about what the civil service might look like for them in 20 years' time. Really interesting session. I don't want to keep them waiting. So I'm going to take one more question from the middle. Sorry, from the front, yes.
You said you like people to be candid, so I'm going to take you at your word.
I'm beginning to regret this.
I like this question already.
The Civil Service Reform Plan presents lots of opportunities.
Yeah.
There's the whole theme of being brave, innovative, and creativity, and encouraging talent. How do you reconcile that with people who apply for promotion and get it, receiving worse terms and conditions as a result?
Well, they shouldn't be receiving worse terms and conditions.
It's going to be cut and they're going to have to work longer hours. So
Well, the leave, people who are promoted, if they've been there for 5 years, there will be no change to their leave, will there? Well, what kind of terms, what kind of leave are they on to? Oh, the privileged days, yeah. Well, I mean, this is one of the things that Bob has been very militant about, which is actually where you've got something like privileged days, which kind of constantly get lampooned in the press, that it's not actually great for the civil service to have something which is really hard to explain to people outside who are not, who don't have that, who don't recognise what that's about. And, I'm the last person to say that civil servants live a feather-bedded life. But there are plenty of people in the media who are willing to say that. And actually getting rid of the terms and conditions which are outliers is the word that Bob often uses about this, I think does make sense. And it will be gradual. But actually, annual leave terms for civil servants capped at 30 days is not ungenerous.
no, but it's the combination of on promotion that seems nonsensical.
Well, I mean, that's the only way you can do it. You can't unilaterally change everyone's terms and conditions when they're in post.
Thanks for the question. Look, we're going to have to leave it there. Francis, thank you for being so open with us, and thank you for taking questions. You would have taken, I know, every question in the room, but perhaps another occasion. Francis, thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Right. See you.